Hey, this is Passy from Passy's World of ICT, the guy with the white hat from Argentina, and it's made out of paper too, but it's still holding together okay. And we got a date processing in VB lesson for you today where we're going to do a lot of different things here, so let's have a look. So date processing in VB. In this lesson, it's jam-packed like all of our lessons. It's value for money here. The date data type, how to enter dates, like the input dates coming in, how you can format dates to make them have different appearances like onto your form. We're going to do some arithmetic with dates. We're going to calculate the day's difference between two dates, and that can lead into being able to work out how old a person is, their age in years, from their birth date. And also we're going to work out what generation they're in, because you know, like people born after 1999 are Generation Z, and then before that you had the millennials, and like the baby boomers were born after World War II in the 50s and early 60s, I think. So yeah, based on their birth date, we'll also categorize what sort of generational group they fit into. So yeah, you don't have to know about those other kind of dates, but we do recommend that you've done the functions lesson previous to this one, because we will be doing quite a few functions in this lesson to do our customized date processing when it needs done. When it needs doing. All right, so we build the following dates and days processes. This is what we're going to make, this guy right here. And so the date processing skills learned in this lesson will be very useful for writing any business type processing or commercial applications you need to write, because those things always have like jobs in them, a job scheduler, completion dates for things, payment dates to make things make sure payments are made on time. All those sort of things in business all revolve around dates. So an understanding of dates is like very important. And that's kind of our calculator there. We'll just give you a quick look at it running. Let's just have a quick look at that. So yeah, like when this is fully finished, what should happen is it's just worked out today's date from the system date on the computer, added on 7 days, so that's some date arithmetic, and we'll show you how to do that, which should take you up to the 21st of April. If we want to put in someone's birth date, so if someone was born, let's say, back in 2001, and we calculate here, they're 18 years old. They've actually spent 6,642 days on this planet already, and their generation group they belong to is Gen Z. Now, if you want to get the day's difference between some dates, so say something was supposed to get finished on the 23rd of March this year, and let's say we just use today's date, the 14th, so the 14th of the 4th, 2019. So the thing was supposed to be finished back in March, but it's not finished, and we're up to today's date. So it's actually 20 days overdue there on that calculator. So that's sort of days difference calculation as well. So they're all the things which this program is going to do. And let's get back to how we're actually going to do it all. All right, so the first thing is the form design. So this form's made up of 4 group boxes. So today's date, 7 days from now. These guys here are all group boxes. So you put them down first, and then you put your text box labels and buttons on top of them, okay? Now, some of these will need special names, like this one is called TXT Date Today, although you could have made that a label if you wanted to, so that people couldn't change it, but it's TXT Date Today. TXT Today plus 7, we've got our TXT birth date where they're entering their birth date, a TXT start date, TXT end date. So those 5 white ones there, those white boxes there are all text boxes. We've got buttons here. This age calculator has its calculate button, which is called BTN Calculate Age, and over here for the days one, that's called BTN Calculate Days. And then we've got labels here where results are coming out. So we've got LBL Age Days, LBL Age Years, LBL Generation, and LBL Days Difference. So yeah, those things will need to have those special names, or they won't kind of match up with the program code and work. Now, if you wanted to make yours the same color as this background color is cornflower blue, a really nice color of blue, and so are these labels here with the white writing on them. These buttons here I think are magenta. The actual results ones are hot pink, that's fire brick red up there. And this really nice dark blue is called midnight blue. So yeah, if you want to make that same color scheme, you can. The font sizes, we're just using a 12 font, 14 font, and 28 point font. Although I think this dd-mm-yyyy, that might be smaller, maybe that's 9 or 10. And they're all Microsoft Sans Serif, the default standard font. And the buttons, we've set them as flat style equals standard. And our labels, we've got everything pushed over to the right on the results. So they've got text align property equals top right on them. So that information should enable you to design a form for this process. Now let's look at entering dates into VBNet. So VBNet, when you're running it, it'll actually check your Windows 10 date, and it knows that we're set up for Australia here and that our system date is in the format of days, months, and then 4-digit years. If you're in the USA using a computer, the Windows 10 running there would probably have your system date set up as the American date, where they put the months first, then the days, and then the years. So you don't have to worry about that actually, that the VBNet will just look at your Windows 10 and it's going to work out the date format for you. And the dates can be input into your VB program in a variety of formats, but the default way of displaying them on the screen is with those forward slashes. But we'll learn how to change that output later on, shortly in this lesson. But let's just look at getting things input. So to input dates, you can separate them by dots, dashes, commas, or forward slashes. They all work. So you can actually put in a date as shown here, 10.04.2019, and when you put it into your text box on your form, that'll all work fine, and it'll just have the forward slashes because that's a default for output. Another input you could use would be like 10-04-2019. That all works okay on the form. You can also put the forward slashes, which is the default normal one, and you can also use commas in between your day, month, and year, and that will be quite acceptable as an input date, and that will turn out on your form okay as well. Now, if you don't have any kind of delimiter or border characters between the day, month, and year, like you just put in 10-04-2019 is here at the bottom, that'll just cause a program crash. It won't be valid for an input date. And also if you put dates which just are not real dates, like months don't have 43 days, so you can't have the 43/15th month of the year. If you put anything in like that, that's going to cause a program crash as well, all right? So that's something you need to be aware of. So we do need to have date validation when people are inputting them, either on a form or they could be getting read in from a file as well. And we'll be learning how to do that, the date validation. Now, the current date, Windows kind of looks at your Windows and knows what format you're using, but it can also get the system date off your computer to know what date it is today. Now, if you want to do that, you just use the equals now function, and you can also code it as .now, I think, as well, which we'll look at later on. But we just say to mention a variable here, dim dt, because it's a date variable, that's the Hungarian, dt date today as date is the type, and we're just going to set that equal now, and that will get today's date. So when we made this video, it was the 12th of the 4th, a couple of days ago. Now it also puts the time in as well as default. So even though we just said this is formatted as date, the actual format is date time format. And so it'll put the time in as well. So we don't actually want to have the time, we just want to have the date, but that's easily fixed. You just use what a quick format as it's called, and we have dt date today. After we've got our equals now to get it, it'll have date and time. If we just want to have the date, we just put on here .to short date string. Okay, and that's just going to put it in as the short date like that, and we will not have the time. If you just wanted to do the opposite kind of thing and just pull out the time, you could use .to short time string, and then it would just show the time in that text box when you move it in there. Okay, so there are kind of these quick formats that you can use to change how your date is going to be displayed on the form. Now, we can add days to a date. So you saw on our form when we ran it that we could get what the date's going to be 7 days from now in 1 week's time. We could have that and we displayed on our screen form, and we did. So you can just do arithmetic here. So when it was the 12th of the 4th, 2019 for the current date, a couple of days ago when we ran this, 7 days from now, just added 7 onto that and worked out, okay, well, that'll be the 19th. A week from then. And so we use the add days function. So this is a built-in function in Visual Basic that we can use. And all we have to do is say, let's dimension dt date plus 7 days as a date field, and take that dt date today that we've worked out using the equals now, and dot add days bracket 7. So we just put in the brackets how many days we want to add on, and it'll add on a week and tell us what the date's going to be in 7 days or 1 week's time. Now, if you want to subtract days, there is no actual subtract days function. But that's fine, they've left it out because you don't really need it. You just have to use negative numbers. So if you wanted to know from any date, could be today's date or any date you like, what was the date exactly 30 days ago, because you know someone should have paid their bill last month 30 days ago, you just use minus 30. So you just put date today dot add days brackets minus 30, and then it'll subtract 30 off. So you can also add months and years onto your date as well. So there's a whole lot of these functions. There's dot add hours if you're doing time, add seconds, add months, all those sort of things there can be used. All right, now let's look at this date formatting. The default is that you have these forward slash separators here, these lines slash sort of tilting to the right in between day, months and years. And so when things are displayed on a form, they just come out with the day forward slash 04 forward slash and a 4-digit year there. Now, if you want to change that, there are many, many custom date formats that you can make up, and there's a big Microsoft document of it. So if you just Google for custom date and time format strings, you'll get this big multi-page document, and there are so many different formats in there for dates and times. But the ones you need to be aware of is that little mm is actually for minutes, not for months. So you have to use capital MM, uppercase MM for month. So that's important, and don't get that mixed up because that's a common mistake. If we want to have our days as double digits, like days like the 1st and the 2nd and the 3rd are 01, 02, 03, well then you use DD. If you want those first early dates like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th just to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 digit, you use a single D. Okay, most times we just tend to use double D. And in a similar way, you can use double M or single uppercase M for months, and double H for hours. So if it's 2 hours, it'll be O2, but if you just want it to not have the O in front, you could just use a single H. MMM, 4 M's will give the full name of the month, like May, June, September, October. You can also change those into foreign languages as well. So you can add on some parameters on the end to sort of make that in French if you wanted to, or in German, or whatever language you like. And 4-digit years are 4 Ys, and 2 little lowercase y's if you just want 2-digit years. So let's have a look at this sort of formatting. So we want to change our dates so that they format with the hyphens or the dashes in between. So we use the toString function to write our own custom display format. So the only thing is you need to make sure the variable which you're going to put this in is a string variable, okay? Because if you just use it as a date variable like we did when we first tried this, it just does nothing. It doesn't work. It'll still have the forward slashes there. It doesn't error or crash or tell you anything's wrong at all. It just ignores it if you haven't defined it properly. So when we make our own program variable, it needs to be string. And also remember, MM is for month, because the little mm is for minutes, and that's easy to get mixed up and make mistakes when you're first trying this as well. So if we take our today's date, that we've got that dt date today, which we got by using the equals now function. If you want to turn that into having hyphens in between it and show it on the form, or dashes, you have to dimension a string variable. So we dimension str date today as string, and we set that equal to the dt date today, which was in date format, and do a .to string on it to convert it into a string. And we want it to show the days as 2-digit days, then a hyphen, a dash, then the months, then a dash, then 4 characters for the year. So that will give us the dash format instead of the // format. So that's our own custom 2-string format. And if we want to have the full month in the name, you just change it. So we've got dd here, space 4 M's, space YYY, and that'll give you like 12 April 2019, okay, for displaying your date. So all these things, there's lots and lots of them, and they're all in that Microsoft document. So you can look through that if you need to do anything special with the dates and change the format, or if you're working for a client and they want to have dashes between, they don't like having the // because, you know, the dashes I think are easier to read than the // makes it all bunched up, but I think the dashes are better. So you can change that if you want to. So the input dates, the problem is that anything coming off the screen, the user, you know, could type any sort of thing into there, and they could easily make typing mistakes accidentally, enter the wrong format, or they forget to fill in a date and just leave it blank. So we've got to have validation. So we've got 3 areas in our application here where they're putting in dates. They're putting in a birth date, and if they're doing a day's difference calculation over with this calculator on the right hand side, they've got a start date and end date they need to enter in. Now I've kind of given them a clue here underneath saying, hey, do it as dd/mm-yyyy, but look, that might not work. So we need to check that firstly, they do not leave them blank. So if they've clicked the calculate button for birth date, we need a birth date in there. If they're just doing birth date, it's okay if these 2 over on the right hand side are blank, obviously, because they're not using that calculator. They're using this particular calculator here, the age one. The date has to be dd/mm/yyyy, so it can't have dashes in it or dots or commas, even though they are allowed. Within Visual Basic, we want them to put slashes in. And the date is an actual real date, so they haven't sort of fat-fingered anything and put in the 32nd of the month instead of the 23rd or something like that. It has to be a real actual date. Now, rather than have, for these 3 different dates we're putting in, we could have code 3 lots of validation into our program. But look, it'd all be the same thing. Everything we code 3 times would just be checking, hey, make sure it's not left blank, make sure it's got this dd/mm/yyyy for the way it was typed in, and make sure that it's an actual real date and not something that's beyond 30 days for a month, or only 31 days, sorry, for a month. Visual Basic, actually, when you move it to a date field, it knows the 30-day months versus the 31 versus February 28 or 29 in the leap year. It knows all of that inside anyway, so that's all okay. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're just going to write one function that we can call for each time we're doing one of those dates, and the function will just always check okay, for that date that the function's been given, is it blank? Does it have the slashes? Is it a real date or not? So the generic date validation function will be set up like this with its overall structure. So this first box here is the subroutine, and down in here is where we're going to build the function. Now we haven't put the function code in yet. We've just put some comments about what we're going to build. So let's look at this bottom half first. This is coded down the bottom of your program just as a separate item, like subroutines are coded as separate items, slabs of code that we put together. And this one's going to be called valid input date check is going to be the name of that function. Now it's going to be defined as Boolean because it's going to return either true or false. If the date is fully okay, it'll set the answer to true and pass that back up to the subroutine. If any of these checks bomb, like the blank check, the format check, or the real date check, if any of those fail, it'll pass back a false result telling you that the date is not valid. Okay, and So that's all of that. Now what we need to pass into it is we have to give it a date, which we want it to validate. So we just get the date off whichever three of those text boxes, whichever one we're doing, and we put it into here, into the function. Now we also need an incoming name so that we can customize error messages, so that if it is the start date that we're actually doing at the moment and checking out, we want to be able to put a message on there, hey, your start date is in the incorrect format. Because if we just put date is incorrect, well, you know, is it the birth date? Is it the start date? Is it the end date? Exactly which one is it? We don't know. So we need to also put the name of the date, which is going to get checked out as well. So when you set up functions, that's its name, valid input date check. That's what's passed back as well. So that's the one that we set to true if everything's okay. And we have to have a return statement in here to return that value back up to the subroutine. And then you have to have an end function. So this was all covered in our previous functions lesson. So if all of that is looking really complicated, it's the first time you've ever looked at it, probably best you go back and review the functions lesson, okay, so that you understand that better. So up the top here, this is a subroutine where we call that function. So we have to make sure we've got the right name here. It's called valid input date check, because that was the name of the function down the bottom of the program where we've actually got all the code to do the function. So they've got to match up and be exactly the same. The actual dates you pass, the names do not have to match, but their formats do. So this wants it to come in as a string into this function, okay? So the date's being passed actually as a string. So we've got to make sure that here we've dimensioned these as string dates, and we've put our date off the form into there because it's a string, and we've also put the word start date because for this particular example we were validating the start date from the form. So you've got to make sure they're in the right format, and they're then put here and here, so that will pass down into the function these two dates which we've set up in the subroutine. And when the function's done its stuff and comes back with an answer, the answer is going to go in here. So BLN date is valid. That memory variable is either going to be false or it's going to be true depending on what the function passes back to us, okay? So let's have a look now at filling out the sort of code, filling out the meat in that function code of what it's going to do. So this is where we're coding the actual function here. So we've got public function, valid input date check. Then right up the end here, which is kind of tricky, well away from here, is what kind of value it is. We're looking at making a Boolean value. That's what this function makes. It makes either a true or a false, and then it returns that back up to the subroutine. Okay, so the first check we're doing is we've got the string incoming date. That's our date that's coming in. If that's blank like this, we want to get an error message produced. So what we have here is if the string incoming date is nothing, then let's set up this error message. Please enter, grab what the name of that was, so that if it's doing like start date, we'll be able to say, please enter start date. If we were calling this function using the birth date, we'd pass in that the incoming name is birth date, so that on the error message, you could put, please enter birth date, okay? So that's why we need this name for the date coming in as well. All right, so that's pretty much it. Set the valid input date check as false. And what we also do is we put a return in here. So we say return that result, the false result, back up to the subroutine. So putting the return in here, sort of midway through the function that we're building, that's like an exit sub in subroutines. It's just going to get out of this function and not do any more checks on the date and just go back to the subroutine and tell the subroutine that, hey, the date check is false, the thing is not valid, okay? So we need to put that return in there. So that's our first check done. And now let's move on to the second check, which was about doing some formatting. Is it in this format that's 10 characters long altogether with slashes, // in between them. So to do that, we use regex pattern matching, and what we can do is we can set up a pattern here that we want 2 digits, then we want to have a // and this backslash is a bit confusing. The backslash is just a separator, so try and pretend those backslashes going to the left are not actually there. And it's saying, okay, we want 2 digits, then we want a forward slash, another 2 digits, then we want a forward slash, then we want 4 digits. So it's going to check, does the date which we've passed into our date checking routine here, does it match up? Is it a match, a regex match with what we've said the valid date format needs to be? And if it isn't, we're going to have this error message here that's kind of across several lines. So we're using VB carriage return line feed. Now this should all be familiar if you've done our previous lessons. So that if they've put in 02/5 2009, well, that looks pretty good, but the problem is they put in 5 instead of putting 05. We want it to have sort of dd-mm and then 4y. So months is supposed to be 2 numbers. So it can't just be one number 5, it's supposed to be 05. So we spelt it out here. It's a problem on the start date. It's got to be 10 characters long altogether. Because they haven't put the 05 there, this will actually only be 9 characters long, so it's not long enough. It's not in the right format, and we've tried to hint there to tell them, yeah, make sure with those single digit ones that you just put a 0 in front of them. So if they put the 0 in front of that, you know, that'd be all fixed and it would stop producing that error. So yeah, if it is wrong, again, set valid input date, check the result of this function to false, and return up to the subroutine, and don't do any more of this function code. So we just need to also have, because we're using regex, you need to have right up the very top of your program code above the public class at the very start, right up there you need import system regular expressions. So you've got to bring your regular expressions kind of plug in as well, because we were using regex here. If you forget to do that, I think this will give an error, or it just simply won't work, and it just won't tell you it's not working either. And also we're setting up that each of those dates where they can type them into the form, we're setting a max length on the form that they can only put a maximum of 10 characters in there. So they can't type more than 10 characters in to the box, the text box, which is on the form. So we're setting that up in the form 1 load, so that when the form first load, it'll have that property set so that people can't type extra things onto the end of a date that are not needed and are longer than 10 characters. And our last check is to make sure the date's real, and that's fairly simple. We just use the isDate function. So a built-in function of Visual Basic is you can take a string format date and just do an isDate function on it. So we just have the function name isDate bracket string incoming date. And so if we got something like the 34th day of the month, well, there's never 34 days in a month, so that's not a real date. It'll tell us that and give us that nice little formatted error message there across 3 lines. So that does all of that. Now, at the bottom of the function, when we've done our first check, our second check, our third check, if we haven't had things wrong, we will not have exited the function yet, so we won't be doing these returns. Everything will be good, and so we can only get down to this stage if everything was good. Otherwise it would have done an exit kind of return and abort because something was wrong. So that means the valid input date check must be true. It must have passed all 3 checks to be able to have made it down this far in the code. So we can just return the valid input date check and set it to true, telling the subroutine that, hey, that date you just passed in for checking, yep, we ran it through our checker, the 3 checks we need to do, and it is all good. So our little function machine has checked out the date and tells the subroutine that it's all good. All right, so the date validation custom function, we can use that to check the end date and the birth date. So that was kind of the details of the start date. Now, once you got this function written, it's so good because you can just set up to check another date so easily. So when we want to do the end date, all we have to do here is just say, okay, let's set the string date to be what the date is that they've typed in the text box, and the name of this one, for if we need to do any error message or anything, this is the end date that we're doing. So you just set all that, set that the date is false at the moment, and then you just go off and call the function and tell the function, hey, here's the date, that's the name of it, go ahead and check it for me and let me know if it's okay. So it's very easy to set up and reuse for different date fields. And when you want to validate the birth date, for example, here, the birth date, all you have to do is just set up that the text you're passing in is the birth date off the form, and the name of it is birth date, and those two things there, once they're put into strings, they can go into the function, and it does the function. The function will do all of the work for you. Notice here we've also got that if the date wasn't valid, just to do the focus, get the cursor put on that birth date. So see how that line's there for the cursor being in that box? Yeah, if something's wrong after you've given the error message, just put that cursor line back in that box so it's all ready to go in the right spot for them to fix it. So functions are so handy if you never ever have to do something more than once. Don't have two slabs of code in your program. Just write a little separate function that can do it, and then it's very easy to just set up and call the function to do the job for you. And the function will just keep doing the jobs forever and ever and never gets tired, and it's really good. So you can get the full code just to see how all of this fits together. Probably for this lesson, it'd be worth getting the downloads with the full code so you can have a look through the code and see, oh yeah, down the bottom of the program here in the code, that's where we've put our functions. And oh yeah, up here we've got the different subroutines calling them, and you can have like a really good look at the big picture of what's going on. Now, that's all very good for doing those 3 checks on any sort of date that we need to pass in, but the birth date also needs one more special check on it. For someone to have an age today, they must be already born. We cannot work out someone's age if they're not born yet. So yeah, you do have to look out for if the user accidentally typed in a future date. So we have a future date check, but when we're trying to find the number of days between 2 dates with that calculator on the right-hand side of the form, look, they could put future dates in and we don't care really. They might want to know in the future how long will it be between 2 dates, okay? So that's fine. They might want to know how long is it from now until I start my holidays on a certain date. How many more days of work do I have to, you know, suck it up for until I'm on holidays? So they might want to do a function like that with future date. So that's fine. But on a birth date, you cannot have a future date birth date. So this would just be coded up in the subroutine. We would not make this part of the generic checker because not all dates that we're processing need this check done on them, okay? So this check would not go in the function. This would just be coded up in the subroutine. All we have to do is check that the string user input date that we get off the form for their birth date, check if it's greater than what the current date is, which we would have got using the, see, we've used it here with date dot now. So you can use equals now, or you can say date dot now. They both do the same thing. They get the current system date. And so yeah, if the date we've got there for the birth date, like here you can see they're putting their birth date down as the 21st of the 10th, 2025, 6 years from now, and it's only the 13th of the 4th, 2019 up here for today's date, okay? So that's very much future dated. Now they're not born yet, so they can't have an age, all right? So I've got to tell them that. Date of birth error, date cannot be in the future. Current date today is just this date here. You'll have to re-enter the birth date, all right? Because we can't have future dated birth dates. So that completes all of the validation checks we will need for our date processor. Yay, we've finished validation. Remember, validation is always a big part of your program. Like you think, oh yeah, I just need to write a program that's just gonna calculate some days difference and work out someone's age. Oh, no problem. But then as soon as you let people put things in on a form, or as soon as you've got kind of input data coming in from an external file, things could be wrong with it that could crash your program or give the wrong answers. So we've got to do that validation. You know, it's not a lot of fun, but yeah, it has to get done. So, you know, we're half an hour into the video and all we've done is get some dates put in and do some validation. So we've better get a bit of a move on with this thing. And we can start coding now, the date processor, yay! All right, so the main part of the date processor is this difference in days because, look, a birth date isn't a big deal for working out someone's age. You're just getting the difference in days and then dividing it to work it out into years. So we'll actually work on this right-hand side calculator first, the days difference calculator, because once we get that guy working, it's going to be very simple to use the function we built for this and just get it to do someone's age from their birth date, all right, by comparing their birth date with today's date and finding a day's difference. So this is the one we're working on first on the right-hand side, and we developed this function back in the functions lesson. So there's not a lot of work to do here because we've already sort of done the hard yards in a previous lesson and made a day's difference calculator. And like we said, the age in years is just a day's difference between when they were born and today's date. It's just that instead of days, we've got to convert it into years, and we divide by 365.25, and we'll explain that later on, why you need the 0.25 on the end. Okay, so the day's different function review from the functions lesson. You're best you've done the functions lesson before doing this dates one. But look, here's a really high-speed review of what we did. We had 2 dates that we wanted to put in, but we just hard-coded them in our program, 20 for the 3rd and 28 for the 3rd. So the day's difference between them is 8 days. So the answer we should get is 8. So into our function that's going to calculate the difference, we're just passing this first date and this second date, and they need to be in date format this time, not string format like that validation function was, but date format. So we're just dimensioning them up here so that we put them into date format, and then in the subroutine, once they're in date format and we've got the 2 dates, they will be passed into this function. So we build the function separately down the bottom of the program. Make sure this is called day's difference and it matches up with the name of the function. Otherwise, this subroutine code will never be able to go down the bottom and find this function anywhere because it'll be yelling out its name. Hey, day's difference, where are you? And there will be no day's difference there because maybe it was called day's different or something, spelt differently. Okay, so this is an integer one. So up the very end here, this is confusing with a function. The actual format for that day's difference value is an integer. So we're just going to have the whole number of days. And here we've got the calculation for it. We're going to subtract the 2 dates that are passed into the function. So those 2 dates there don't have to have the same name, but the function will pick up that, yeah, you passed in the 20 for the 3rd and the 28 for the 3rd. It'll subtract them using the .subtract function and put it into total days. And then also do a math.floor, which will truncate it and get rid of any decimal places that we don't need. And that will get passed back up into the subroutine there and go into our int number of days variable, which we've set up back in the subroutine. Here we've got a couple of functions inside other functions there. So, because we're kind of doing the math floor function, but in here we're doing the kind of function to subtract dates, the built-in subtractor function for dates. So yeah, 2 functions in one there. And this is what it'll put out because we just were using message boxes on this one. We didn't have a form or anything set up. So we're just putting out a 3-line message box there. What was your first date, second date? And day's difference, as we expected, was actually 8 days. So that's kind of how you set it up in the subroutine. This is the actual function you need to write to do day's difference. We've got all that knowledge, so let's get into it and do it for this program. All right, so we need to convert our string date, which came off the form, because remember it came out of the text box on the form, which means it's just a string. But this day's difference needs them in date format. So I've got to change that string value from the form into date format. We've already validated it, done our 3 checks. It's all okay, so it's all right to do this. Now, when you try and do this actually, using casting, like cast it into a date, dimensioning a new one called DT, Hungarian for date, as date, so this is setting up a date variable, and we're just taking our string value off the form. Visual Basic puts these out in light blue because you don't actually need them. This code would work without the casting in there. For some reason, Visual Basic has this built-in casting. So as soon as you put a string date into a date field, it's going to actually check that it's a real date. It'll crash if it isn't, and it will also just convert it into date format for you. But look, in other languages, you might have to do the conversion, and it certainly doesn't hurt to have it in this program code. Like, it doesn't do any harm. It just sits there, and Visual Basic just puts in light blue saying, by the way, I'm not actually going to use this because I've kind of got my own little built-in function already that's going to do it. So yeah, we're going to pretty much use that day's difference function we just showed you. However, and there's always a however, we had to have a however in this video, we're going to make a slight modification to the function just so it copes all right with negative values, okay? And we'll show you that here. Look, if they put the dates wrong way around, the start date and the end date, so if the start date is actually sort of the 1st of January, okay, and then, hang on, am I doing this the right way around? No. Let's say you wanted to do from the 1st of January to the 3rd of February, okay? So you'd put start date 1st of January, end date 3rd of February. But if you put them in back to front and put like the start date was the 3rd of February 2019, but the end date was the 1st of January 2019, so they're back to front. Look, it doesn't matter. It'll just make a negative answer when you subtract the two dates, and that'll be fine. So what we do is we just set up here some code. If the days came out less than zeros, if you do get a negative answer, just take the days and times them by -1 to turn them into a positive answer. So this will just guarantee we always get positive answers getting returned by the function. So we just put that in as a little bit of extra code here in this version, and everything else is pretty much the same as we showed you from the functions lesson. And another thing is that you can use something else. See how we were using the dot subtract built-in function here? If you want to, you can just take the two dates, as long as they're in date format, and do your end date minus your start date. So you can do straight up kind of maths arithmetic using a minus subtract sign here, and this will give you the exact same answer. So just be aware of that. You can actually subtract two dates. You don't have to use the dot subtract built-in function. You can just use good old-fashioned mathematics with a subtraction sign. And the subroutine to call this, we need to set that up. So the days difference function, remember we just saw that, that's all coded separately down the bottom of your program. We need to just set up our dates that we've got, make sure they're in date format. So the stuff on the form that we're looking at, turn that into a date format one so that when you pass it in here, it's in date format going down into the function. And we need to have a variable dimensioned here, int number of days as double. Now I think that should have been integer because it's only returning the number of days in whole number form anyway. It doesn't matter if it's double, but we probably could have put integer there. And especially since we've called it int number of days, that should be integer actually. That's a mess up and I'll have to go fix that in the program code. And so yeah, in number of days, the function will do its stuff and it'll bring back the number of days and tell you what they are. And then you can just put that in the days difference out on the form there. Just convert the integer number of days into a string using casting, C string, convert to string, or cast to string, that integer value that came back from the function and we stored here, and put that in the text on the form, and that'll be it. We will have done our days difference function from the user putting in a start date and an end date. So that's the right-hand calculator on our form done. And again, like, get the downloads to see the complete code because we need to move along with this. So you need to test it out. So we tested it out here. Someone put in 2nd of January up to the 10th of January. Well, that should be 8 days difference there, and it did work it out as 8 days. If they put them in backwards, like they put in the 30th of January to the 10th of January, well, it does the end date, 10 minus 30 be -20, but because we had that little fix in our program there in the function, it will actually just put it out as +20, because days, it doesn't really make sense if you've got negative days. Days are just kind of days and they're really positive thing. Especially if you're getting older and you want to live more days, every day you get is very positive. Not that I'm at that stage yet, but I hope when I am, it's all going to be good. Calculating a person's age. So it's simply doing the left-hand calculator now because that right-hand one's finished. Look, all you have to do is divide by 365.25. Because of these leap years every 4 years, we get that one extra day. On average, that makes every single year, if you averaged it, they're all about 365 and 1/4 days long. So they could have just set up the years like that if they wanted to. And every year's 365.25. Now, if you use 365, you will actually get errors because we tried that out. And what will happen is if it's close to someone's birth date and they've actually had their birthday and they should have already turned the next age, it won't work properly and they won't turn the next age until like a week later. So you really do need to put that 0.25 on the end. So all we do is when we dimension our int age in years, so we get the days difference thing, and that'll tell us how old they are in days. We can put in here their age in days is, wow, if you're 17 years old, you've already been on the planet 6,255 days. And we just divide that by 365.25. So we have a math.floor to round off and get rid of any decimal parts. Put the days in, the days difference between their birth date and today, and divide that by 365.25. The 0.25 is real important, and that means they're 17 years old, okay? So that's all good, and that was the input birth date, the 27th of the 2nd, 2002. So yeah, it should be easy to get that working pretty quickly. Just calling that same days difference function, but passing into it the birth date and the current date today. But see the complete code in the downloads for that. So the days difference is really useful in business and banking. Could be used out for working out when a job's completed. You know, in a job tracking system, if people paid, how many days overdue are they in their payments? If a job isn't finished yet, how many days late is that job running? Banks use it, like with your credit card, if you had to pay some bill, some balance, there was a minimum balance you had to pay on the last bill. They can work out, okay, it's so many days since that minimum balance was supposed to be paid and you have not paid it, so they'll charge you interest and give you late payment penalties as well. So days difference is really important in banking. And gas and electricity companies between bills, like to do that little calculation where they say your average daily energy cost is $3.50 or whatever it is on the bill, they would have to work out the days difference between this bill and the last time they gave you a bill, and then they can take the total cost and divide by the days and work out on average how many dollars a day it costs to use your gas or electricity. So we could not live without these days difference function, especially in the business world. Now you would have noticed we had another thing on there at the bottom of the form for the age, which was putting them in their generation group, whether they're a millennial, a baby boomer, a Gen X, or whatever. So we're just building one last function to do that. So here are the age ranges here. Someone was born just after World War II, 46 to 64, they're a baby boomer. People born recently are Gen Z, then you got the much maligned millennials. I'm not sure if I've spelt that right. But we're just gonna have a function here called determine generation. We're gonna pass in the person's birth date, and it's going to tell us what generation group they belong to, and we'll put that straight out onto the form into the text box we've set up, which is called LBL generation. Okay, so that's very quick to set that up in our subroutine to do that. Now let's have a look at the actual function we're setting up. So we're calling it determine generation. It needs an incoming birth date passed into it in date format as a date, and the determined generation is going to be passed back as a string because it's going to be a word. It's going to say silent, boomer, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z, or unknown. And the case statement is fantastic for doing this because we've got ranges. So rather than write some super long complicated if else, using the case statement is really, really good for this. So we're just going to set up first up that their generation is spaces, and we're going to look at the incoming birth date. So the cases we're looking at are for the incoming birth date. If it's in this range, well then the generation string to pass back is silent. You know, if it's in this range here, those birth dates, then they're a Gen X, so we're going to pass back Gen X. So whatever we got for string generation, we're going to put that into determine generation, which is the name of the function, return that back up to the subroutine, and then the subroutine's resource is just going to put that straight out onto the label on the form. So again, like see the complete code for that. And when we check that out, someone born in 2002 here, you can see their generation has come up as Gen Z because after 1996 they should be a Gen Z. This person here born in 1990 is actually 28 years old and they're a millennial. And this person here born, long time ago, 10 years after World War II finished, because they're 63 years old. Wow, they've been around for 23,000 days on the planet. What have they done during all that time? And they're a baby boomer, okay? So they're in the boomer generation. So that all works out pretty nice and neat. So we've got a challenge task related to that called star signs. We need you guys to take on the challenge here, and after you've built the age and days processor and got it working, from their birth date we can add in another field down here called another label called LBL star sign, and these are the dates for the star signs back from when we did our horrible horoscopes lesson. And if we code those as just the day and the month and then the day, so January 20, that's the first month, 0120, up to the second month, 0218. So we're just going to code these ranges like this, And then what we can do is we can reformat their birth date. So the function will receive their birth date in, but we're just going to reformat and grab the mm and the dd. And so this person here would come out as 0216. If someone was June 2nd, we're just going to take the month 06 and 02. If they're May, that's the 5th month, 0512. October 27 is the 10th month, 1027. So we'll recode their date like this and then check which range it fits into. Okay, and then you can find out their star sign. So you'll have to finish working out these ranges, like Aries here, March 21. You'll need 0321 to 04 for April, 0419. So you need to keep doing these little ranges, and they're the ranges you're going to use in your case statement. And so we have done this. We tried the challenge task ourselves. It will work, and this will be a good little practice for you and a great review of the case statement, because the case statement can just be so useful and so much better than if else in a lot of circumstances. So we do have our programming course on the web, and we've been talking a lot about make sure you've done the previous functions lesson. So if you go to our website, PassyWorldOfICT.com, and go to programming, you'll be able to go down and lessons and lessons and lessons here, and all these free videos to watch. Yeah, the creating custom functions lesson. So click here to go to the lesson, and then you can go there and go there. It'll give you a bit of an overview of the lesson, and these slides are really handy to look for as a quick review of the lesson as well. And yeah, so that's a little bit about it. That was everything we covered in the lesson. There's a free YouTube video you can watch. If you want all of the code and all of the kind of summary slides, like a little mini textbook chapter all about functions, well then look, you know, for less than $2 US, less than 3 chicken McNuggets, less than some tiny, tiny little candy bar at the drugstore or the petrol station or the gas station, you can have that ultra cheap and pay for it securely with PayPal. All right, so that is another lesson done, but where am I up to on the slides here? So PassyWorldOfICT.com programming. All right, so we're putting out new videos every week. We hope you enjoyed this one. This will tell you everything you need to know about dates processing. Will help you out if you're building a business app for a major project, as quite a few people will be doing in software development here in Melbourne, Australia. Building that app in a couple of months when we've designed it all. Yeah, you'll need to do dates processing to do reporting. So it's a really important skill for all projects. And you'll also see how useful functions are. Like once you start programming with functions, you'll wonder, how did I ever do an application or a program without using functions? Because they are just so useful and so good. So hopefully this lesson has reinforced how to do functions as well, because they're super important. And we hope you're having fun with the course. There'll be another video out next week. Until then, it's bye from us.